Hi, everybody. Good evening. And thank you for joining me for Through the Firewall, the intimate conversations about God, prayer, and personal spiritual issues. I put together this last reflections class for the year because I thought, how would I like to wind down this year, this incredibly chaotic year, which still has a lot of chaos going on. But and I thought, you know, what about if we gather together and I brought up prayers and then I brought you inside the prayers and we just talked about all things spiritual and the nature of God, and I surrounded you with grace and rich questions of the soul and your spiritual life, and made things as cozy as I could within you and around you. And that was my intention in doing these next 4 sessions together. And hopefully um just packing you full of grace, and somehow in doing that, helping you to feel that in fact there's something greater than us that's in charge, something guiding us. In one of the teachings I love so much in Taoism is not to get attached to what is happening in the moment, that all things are passing through, that what's happening in front of us is really a spectacle that's taking place in a moment in time, and in the next moment it won't be there. And so the great object of the spiritual life is to learn to maintain yourself no matter what the spectacle is that's playing out in front of you. Whether that spectacle is being offered a great big huge ice cream sundae when you know your body can't take that amount of sugar, and saying I can't, it's just a spectacle, and in a second it's going to melt and it won't be there, and flies will be on it, and I won't eat it. And if I just give it a few minutes in the sun and let it melt and let the flies show up, it's not going to look nearly as attractive, but it's the same stuff. It's just going to let it change shape. Or whether it's a different type of chaos that's now playing out, it's still a spectacle. And yet it can be so pressurizing. So I thought, let's just go to the heart and soul of it, which is the inner life. And so I thought, well, let's just go where the power is, and that's inside. And I called it Through the Firewall. And there's a reason for that. And I want to chat about that for a second. There is, I absolutely love the stories of the mystics and their lives. And I have since I was forever on this planet. I am intrigued with that part of ourselves that feels called, and those people who have been called to follow that which no one else can hear, that voice that no one else can hear, that life that no one else gets, that passion that no one else understands. And those people it's intrigued me, and God knows why, and I wish it hasn't, because it's formed my life, and it just is an astonishing thing, right? But even all the teachings of all the spiritual masters that are worth anything, all of them, they all speak of, or they've all devoted their lives to encouraging their disciples or their students to reconcile this incredible difference between what our physical life is like and that difference of the life in the invisible world, and how what we cannot see actually is far more fair, far more just, far more real than what we can see. And as Buddha would say, look, what you are looking at is actually evaporating every moment. It's actually melting like the ice cream every second. It's actually aging and falling apart like leaves on a tree. Every moment you look at it, it's a different tree. There's nothing. You think this physical world is solid, but you're crazy. The invisible world that you cannot see is the world that never changes. It's the world that is forever constant. Somehow we cannot seem to get that, and as we we think we get it, but we can't seem to get it to the extent that we live in some comfort zone with knowing the invisible world is an ally to life in this physical world, that there's an allyship, that there's a way to communicate with it through prayer, that there's a purpose to your life, and there's a guidance system that's available. And the idea is to make it through this firewall. And that it has been my experience again and again that the fear people have of going through this firewall is that somehow it will cost them everything in their physical world. That somehow if they go near this invisible world, that it will so disrupt them. It will so disable it will be so expensive to their physical life that some off-planet God is going to sweep down here and take their money, take your money, take your bank account, cause you to live a life of celibacy and poverty and isolation, because that's the way it is in two different worlds. I mean, this, we simply can't seem to cross this Rubicon that allows both the energetic part of ourselves and the matter part of ourselves to work as a team. And yet, I think we are at this critical place in our evolution where a kind of organic divinity is emerging, where the idea of this off-planet God, these off-planet gods, whether it's in Judaism or Buddhism or Islam or Christianity, they're kind of going to fade. It won't happen in our lifetime. But what is happening in our lifetime is that there's a gradual moving away. We don't relate in the same way to the mythologies in these religions or these traditions, that what we will relate to is this idea that we co-create our reality, that there's a power in us that is incredible, and it's like spiritual physics, that we do have influence. And while we are exploring that influence at the level of our health, eventually, we are going to we will extend that to recognizing, well, if I create the health of my body, then I must co-create the health of my environment and maybe my impersonal environment. And where does that stop? Which means I must influence the health of your environment. So maybe we co-create together, which brings the pandemic up and climate change. And the fact that as we are learning about this era of co-creation that in which we all live, is it by coincidence that we are now confronting challenges, predicaments, crises that require we co-create our way out? That it's not enough that that a group of people, start recycling in order to better heal the environment, or it's that all of us together have to co-create a very different planetary environment. And while it is a very bold thing to say, and indeed it is the organic nature of the divine to perhaps lead us toward each other through crisis, through needing each other. So when someone says, what is the nature of God like? What is the nature of God like? This is the nature of God. The nature of God is exactly this, that we are creatures of learning. We are creatures of learning. And what are the lessons? I don't like that word. What are the important truths that we truly need to learn? And that's that we are the engines of what is created here. We're the engines. There is no off-planet God that comes down here and says, I think it's time for an earthquake here and a fire there and this and that and this and that. That's not, when I hear people say, boy, Mother Nature's angry, oh my God, that you don't personalize nature. You don't take your emotions and your rage and personalize it any more than we take our system of justice and our little court, such as it is, such as it was, and project it into the heavens and decide that's how God is. That our court of law with a jury is somehow how the celestial world works, so that we would say things like, well, there must be a reason, and this isn't fair. I've done nothing to deserve this fate, to deserve this punishment. I have been good, therefore bad things can't happen to me. We take our way of thinking and we project it into the heavens, and we think, if we work on this law of eye for an eye, certainly, of Hammurabi's code, certainly heaven must work that way. After all, that's what's fair. And while I suspect there is a grand scheme of balance that inevitably runs through the currents of life, I am not sure that we are qualified to actually figure it out. That's number one. Number two, I don't think that I have no idea how many lifetimes feed in to events that play out. And number 3, I don't know that we're even qualified to grasp that some of the events the scale by which we measure things, like how often it is that we decide this must be a terrible thing because it's uncomfortable, or because it's difficult to get out of, or because we don't like what it costs, and we're looking at it in the moment because we cannot think out of the moment, much less can we think in terms of a life yet to come, which is of no interest to us whatsoever. And yet, this situation that's happening might somehow be tied to choices we need to make a year from now or 5 years from now. This is what I believe to be true. And I think this is the organic nature of God. The universe is a very impersonal design. It is a system of laws. Laws, everything's law. The law and order, the order of the planets, the order of night and day, the order of the blood pressure in your body. I mean, if our blood pressure goes over a certain number, off there goes the heart. There goes a blood. There goes a heart attack or an aneurysm, or we are mathematical creatures. If our heartbeat goes too fast or too slow, we have to stay within a number. Everything is ordered. Everything. And when systems fall out of order, life goes out of balance, and systems kick in to put things back into balance. That is the nature of God. It is totally impersonal, but it is totally intimate. And this is what is astonishing to me, that in the intimacy, it seems that every single choice we make, every thought we have, every tiny little minuscule thought, every response we have, every little everything we have, somehow or other is known, and not just known, that its energetic component has had an influence as an act of creation. And that influence is registered. And we are held accountable, not responsible, accountable, which is a whole different thing. An account is taken, and we're held accountable for the acts of creation that we have set into motion while we are alive in the gift of this life, and who has benefited or not because of the acts of creation we have set into motion. Perhaps they were acts of destruction. And I told the story once. And this man became a minister, and it's his story. So I'm going to tell his story. And I have to, just give me a second to recall it. Okay. He was he was from the West Coast, I think the Washington area, and he was a construction. He was a contractor. Apparently, he was a very successful person, and because he also worked on the buildings himself, he was in very good shape. He was very good looking. He had it all and made a lot of money, and he lived well, and so he had everything going for him. And he was very much a daredevil. So he, would climb mountains and throw himself off mountains and do things that people do who just, put cords around and jump off things. And I don't get that kind of thing. But anyway, he had apparently a very, was it an accident? He had an accident, very bad accident. So he had to go to the hospital. And okay, so he was sewed up, all that other stuff. Okay, his mom picks him up, and they're going home. He's about 28. And apparently she thought he was okay. He thought he was okay. She decides to stop at one of those stores like a Home Depot or something. I'll be right back, she said. While she goes in the store, he thinks begins to have a heart attack. He knows he's having a heart attack. So he goes into the store and says to call an ambulance. I'm having a serious problem. And he has a heart attack. Mother happens to be a nurse. And then, so he actually does have this near-death experience. And he was dead for quite a long period of time. And he was shown two things that really, of the things he was shown, these are the two things that totally changed his life. He was, by the way, at the time engaged to be married. These glasses are driving me nuts. So if they're driving you nuts, then I'm always doing this. They're driving me crazy too. First thing that he was shown was that when he was little, 7, 8 years old, he was in one of those little stores and he stole something in what he thought was very insignificant. So insignificant, he never thought about it again, ever, like a 10-cent something. But he was shown that the owner saw that, and that for the owner, this wasn't just yet another 10-cent toy, but that the owner had seen so many children steal from him that it broke his heart. That was it. It was like the straw on the camel's back. And the owner felt that he just could not take any more disappointment with children. And it just shattered him. And I guess he closed the store, and that was that. So it wasn't the matter of wealth. It was that I can't take my disappointment in the innocence of children. I thought, I just can't. It's one thing catch an adult stealing, but a child, he just couldn't do it. And for him to see this, he had, as for the rest of his life, he never even thought about that again. The other thing he was shown was that when he was in his late teens, he stopped to help out this man and never thought about it again. Never. And yet for that man, it made all the difference in the world that a young man would help him. And he was shown the consequence to that man's life, that in fact it changed his whole life, because this young teenager was kind to him. So what this did was it took the scale of God from this off-planet theoretical being that maybe existed, maybe didn't exist, and it turned that divine force into a being, a presence, shall we say, that was so intimately involved in our lives that every single choice we make, every single thing we look at, every book we read, every person we're with, every relationship we have matters. Matters. And it's not about what we get out of people, but what we give. It's not about how much money can we take and squeeze out of this deal, but how can this help everybody? Heaven is watching. Heaven watches everything. And it's really hard to live with that because, and I don't mean it in a threatening way. I don't mean it that way at all. I mean it in the most deliciously comfortable way. Which is why the way I pray is very conversational. Like, get over here. I need some help. I need it now. I need it. I need help and I need it now. And from the time I say that kind of, do something here, I just assume the wheels are helping me. I never assume how. I never do that. I know where my limits stop and heaven begins. I never tell heaven how to help me. I think about things like I wouldn't mind, but I know better. I know better. Just like during the election, my prayers one night, I said, "Are you voting? I mean, like, are you voting? Don't tell me whose side you're on, but I'd like to think that you're voting." But I knew heaven doesn't do that. I mean, I was just like in my own wild fantasies. But everything down here is just us. And heaven will let it fall the way we fall. Now, in this relationship to intimacy is a big deal. And why I say that is because I want you to just look at yourself. Just don't look at yourself. Look at how sensitive you are. Not about what people say. I mean, none of that garbage. I'm talking about sensing. Look at how much you can sense. Just your senses. How easily you read your world. How easily you sense the presence of that which is around you. How easily you are wired into the intelligence in the invisible sphere in which you dwell. How very simple that is for you. Okay? So you've already crossed through part of this firewall so that you're multisensory, where your eyes and your ears and your physical senses, they're not enough. They're not sufficient for you anymore. You have your inner senses, your intuitive senses, your multi senses. They're well on their way now to providing you with all kinds of data. And while you are utilizing that data for relationship mostly. Perhaps you have not thought relationship with the divine or the invisible world is also a relationship. And though it's not the type of relationship in which conversation engages the way you and I would speak, it's one in which your inner senses become receptive, in which your five senses are not of any use. You have to withdraw and turn these off because they're always looking for signals to protect you. Your five senses are very much about protection in the outside world. Is something coming? Do something this. You're always looking for how to protect you and what's going on in your physical world. Your inner senses are about perception and sensing energy and being aware of being guided to this, say this, receive this, create this. It's not always about protection. It's not always about heal this person. It's a very different range of information. Now, and in fact, moving from information into the reception of knowledge. So the first prayer that I chose for us to dive into is called Holy Listening, because when you decide I want to cross that Rubicon, I want to go through that firewall, I want to go into that territory. Oftentimes people have that same expectation where they start praying, or they go in with this idea of, looking for their physical world to change, because they look for a reward because they've started to meditate, or they've started to do something that would fall under the category of spiritual. And they immediately look for rewards or look for something in the physical world to indicate that they're doing a good job. Holy listening is a very different way of beginning that journey inward, of simply waiting, of simply being, which for someone who's used to productivity would drive them crazy. I'm showing up and I'm producing. I'm being productive. I'm being here and show yourself. Reward me. Give me something. It's not how heaven works. Not how heaven works. That's just it. It's in fact, it's quite the opposite. It's unwinding you. Even the waiting is an answer to your prayer, but you don't get it. That's part of the mystical masterpiece of holy listening. So I'm going to read this prayer and then I'll just chat with you. That's why I wrote this prayer. Lord, today I will let me just say this as a disclaimer. And I explain this in the book, but for those of you who haven't, and I'm sure many of you don't have the book, but what I say in the book is, I don't care how you refer to. I do not have this image of a non-physical God anymore, or a religious whatever. And I don't care what anybody calls their relationship with the divine. You could do goddess, divine, creator, I don't care. And through the years, people have told me, I have heard things you wouldn't believe. Great oneness. I mean, I can't, I'm sorry, but I can't relate to any of that. I cannot relate to any of that. And there's just, to me, all that sounds like is political correctness gone off the rails. And but whatever a person is comfortable with. And for me, because it's in my blood and bones, I still use Lord. And I still use Holy Mother when I'm referring to the Madonna. And here's a curious thing about that. Even though I have no sense anymore of that maleness, and I really don't. Nevertheless, those words make all of this universe intimate for me. And that's the role that language serves. And so whatever language you have that can make all of this intimate, that's what I would recommend. And go for it. And that's, so for me, I go back to Lord. So Lord, today I will spend time in holy listening in silence. Today I listen for the sound of how you express yourself in my life. In ancient days, you spoke through the wind, through fire, through storms, through the movement of the sun. The ancients saw you everywhere and in everything. They recognized your presence in nature, in the forests, and in the whisper of leaves rustling to sudden breezes. Our thinking today is that they were foolish, frightened human beings, little more than cave dwellers, wandering a primitive earth, but perhaps not. Perhaps they were really filled with clarity, unencumbered by doubt. They stood on a silent earth, a clean, pure earth, empty of noise. Everything was fresh and unpolluted. They saw you everywhere because you were everything to them. They recognized their vulnerability and were filled with the humbleness that came with dependence upon sacred power. I do not know how to listen for you in nature. I have grown accustomed to trusting my mind for instructions. I do not know how to find you in the many distractions and noise in my mind. I do not know how to be silent from within, but I will begin by creating a silent world around me. With closed eyes, I imagine myself approaching a holy well deep within me. I drop a single pebble into that well and listen for the delicate sound of one pebble slipping into the softness of the holy center of my being. There, in that sacred, silent, inner place, I shall wait for you. It always helped me to write these prayers. And so what inspired that was so often when I would feel chaotic and I would want to get to that inner place. It was never enough, when somebody would say, well, I just need to go into a quiet space. I wanted to be that quiet space. I didn't want to go to a quiet space. What difference would it mean if I went to a quiet room or I live in a quiet house if I wasn't quiet? And if I could be that quiet space, then I could be anywhere. I could be downtown on State and Madison. I could be in Manhattan. Then in no place, I could be on a jet going back to London. It wouldn't matter where I am if I could be that quiet space. That was my goal. Not to have some kind of artificial thing where I had to get to a certain type of space and have to have a certain type of atmosphere in order for me to be tranquil. I thought, how powerless, how utterly powerless. Either I could be that within myself, no matter where I was, or not. And that was my goal. That was my goal. And that's what inspired that prayer in me and my need to do holy listening. And so I began to listen deeply and to listen for what distracted me so that I could attend to that. To attend to distraction. What distracted me and why? Where did I go when I was trying to be tranquil? And this is my counsel to you. I'm going to read the guidance because there's some points here that I want to make because they're worth talking about. Inner silence is not the same as being quiet. Being quiet means you're not speaking, or that you've removed yourself from external noise, or that you want to get away from chaos to be alone. Entering silence, on the other hand, is the choice to turn your attention inward with the intent to listen for the rustling of holy wind in your soul. Holy listening is listening below your head. Release the endless questioning nature of your mind and breathe your attention into your solar plexus. You'll have to do this again and again during the day because out of habit, you'll kick into mental gear in a microsecond. And if you're engaging in ordinary activities, you'll have to adapt sacred silence and holy listening into your world. The rest is just stuff you can read on your own. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that with holy listening, you want to become accustomed to setting time a day, setting whenever, it could be whatever, and honestly being still and saying, this is between you and me, God. This is our time together. This is just you and me, you and me. And what will happen? What will happen is that at some point, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence of you doing holy listening, as a natural consequence of saying, I'm waiting for you and I am concentrating on just being still with you, being in grace with you, just being in grace with you. As a natural consequence of invoking that grace, what will happen is you will need that holy listening. You'll start craving it, and it won't happen in a week. I promise you that, but you'll start needing that time, and that's that. And what you are actually needing is contact with the grace from that. It's subtle, very subtle, but you'll find that I just need to be, and you'll say, I just need to be still for a moment. Just leave me alone. And you'll just want to be still and say, this must be you. This must be what you feel like, God, because I just wanted to be here. And it's not like there won't be any lights on. It won't be anything like that. It's exactly how Teresa described the first mansion of the soul. She said, in the first mansion, Your whole life's not going to change a whole lot when you start this journey in the self-knowledge. But what does happen is that as much as not a whole lot changes, something changes just enough so that you find that you keep going back. And it's just enough. That's holy listening. That's holy listening.